The Canon EOS M50, the Canon Powershot ELPH 180, and also my Moto G Stylus 5G phone. I took those three to my local Japanese garden, get a feel of the experience of using the different style of camera and the different results between the three. For whatever reason, I decided to take photos that weren't very similar between the different cameras. Trying to juggle the three cameras at the same time was a challenge, and I guess at the time I was like, whatever. However, I did get some photos that were relatively similar. Obviously, it's not scientific testing, but we can at least get a feel for the different types of cameras. If you don't know about the ELPH, it's a small Digicam, which I like to call them, has an integrated lens, small sensor. In comparison to a phone, you know, obviously the phone, you use an app, you can do whatever with that. The default app is probably what I was using, and that does allow for raw photos. And with the Canon ELPH 180, no raw photos, straight JPEG. Obviously with the M50, you can do raw photos. Let's do some comparisons. First off, you can see the aspect ratios are different between the two cameras. That's the actual sensor size. If you're into this taller format, that's a consideration. It could be something you actually want. With the JPEG, by default, it pulled in more information. There is a visible difference. And as I said, with the M50, I can adjust this to make it better, which I might as well do. Dehaze, there we go, yeah. Put a little bit more detail in there. Now you can see with a very quick edit of the M50 file, it's got the sky back. Colors are still different, but I could adjust that as well if I felt like it. So now there's more information in the M50 file. If you were to shrink these files down quite a bit, you would potentially not notice. I'm going to compare the three files from the different cameras. This is the only one I have of the three, I believe. You can see that the ELPH 180 by default looks pretty rough. It's over saturated, over vibrant, whatever term you want to use, and it doesn't look good at all. The M50 file, I would say this is more of a natural look to it, but it does have kind of the army green colored leaves. But down here we can see the ELPH 180 is the worst for highlights, at least unadjusted. The Moto is kind of a second place. The M50 is first place with those highlights. Let's look at this rock here with the moss on it. There's barely any detail on the ELPH 180 photo, but I think it could potentially be a focusing issue because there is a little bit more information in the background. By default, you can see the shutter speed differences, 1/250th of a second with the M50, which is a bit lower than it probably needed to be. And then over here, we've got 1/400th of a second, and the Moto would have to be very quick because it has the f1.7 aperture lens that can't change. One potential limitation of smartphone cameras is that when they do have the fixed aperture, which there are a few smartphone camera modules that have variable apertures, but they're pretty rare. There might be ways in software to simulate the look of the M50 photo with the Moto. By default, you can see that it had to use a higher shutter speed, and the water reflects the differences. Sadly, the ELPH 180 is looking really rough in this photo. Here I've got the ELPH 180 and the Moto G Stylus 5G. Very similar photo. One of the few that I was able to get a pretty close match. You can see the color differences by default. More of a yellow look to the Moto, which isn't great, but I think it might have been a bit more true to life compared to the ELPH 180, which is more of a cool blue. These are actually both JPEG photos. It looks like my framing was slightly off with the ELPH 180, so it's a little bit smaller. Overall, I'd say these ones are comparable enough. You could get by with either one. Here's another one. We've got the ELPH 180 and the M50. The ELPH 180 is struggling with these highlights up here. It's more washed out looking. I could potentially adjust that image. You can see the lines on the shoe that barely show up in the ELPH 180. Actually, in this specific situation, there are more optical aberrations with the ELPH 180's lens. Very clear difference with the M50. Okay, this one we've got a different aperture on the ELPH 180. That's f3.2 instead of f9. And the M50 is at f8 again. And with the ELPH 180, there's some fringing, which is not good. Actually, the ELPH 180 photo looks really nice. I think that's more than sufficient for many situations where you want a specific look. You're trying to capture something that I think the ELPH 180 did a good job here, at least at this small resolution that we're looking at them. on screen. Actually, the M50 suffers a little bit in this situation with the specific lens that it's using for flare. It's got that green circle that is because of the reflections inside the lens happening. If you work at it and you really try, you can get some good stuff out of the ELPH180. Here's a good point with the ELPH180's lens compared to the M50 kit lens. I was not able to focus as close with that M50 setup. Obviously, if I used a different lens on the M50, I could rectify that, but in this specific situation, ELPH180 wins because it has the built-in optical lens that zooms closer. Last photo, we got the ELPH180 and the Moto G Stylus 5G. That is a D&G, so it's raw. See the color differences by default. The Moto actually looks a little rough with the default colors. It's very cool, very blue. I think the ELPH180 worked out slightly better in this situation. Some differences here, so it looks like the Moto is a little bit better in this area, but the convenience here is that the Moto G Stylus 5G is most likely always going to be with you. That was a fun little experiment with the 3 different cameras. You can see there are situations where one might work better. Nice optical zoom lens of the small Digicam. It is certainly as small as my smartphone, so I could easily take it with me in a cargo pants pocket. These days, I would just use my smartphone, but optical zoom is a benefit. Having a full dedicated larger sensor camera with interchangeable lenses is the best option. Something with the photos where you crop in a lot. Obviously, having a higher quality dedicated camera is a good idea, but it's not a lot of the time extremely needed and useful, and it's more about the experience in some situations with the nice large digital camera. If you found this video interesting and helpful, Scott RV Bonsai, thanks.